to discuss Unit 4 with you. And my name is Angela Orr. I'm the Washington County School District K-12 Social Studies Coordinator.
My name is Jared Pallotta. I'm the District Court Judge here in I'm Dick Schulze. I'm an attorney with the law firm Home and Hart.
I'm Zalal Lowell. I'm the co-coordinator of this program. I'm also a deputy DA here in Washington.
Okay, and why don't you introduce yourself again for our community?
Good afternoon. We are Reno High School's Unit 4. My name is Sophia Call.
I'm Cameron Ware.
I'm Lauren Lynn.
My name is Andrew Berryessa.
And I'm McKenna LeVay, and our unit coach and teacher is Mr. Richard Clark.
Hello, Mr. Clark.
Hello, Ms. Orr.
Okay, so this afternoon we'd like to ask you question 1. In the Constitution, why are the powers and limits on Congress addressed first and in greater detail than those of other branches? In addition to the powers granted to Congress in Article 1, what other provisions in the Constitution address legislative powers? Why? How have the enforcement provisions of amendments adopted since the Civil War increased congressional power? Begin.
In the second treatise of civil government, John Locke claims, the fundamental law of all commonwealths is the establishing of the legislative power as the first and fundamental natural law for the preservation of society and every person in it, providing reason for why the powers and limits of Congress are addressed first and in greater detail in the Constitution.
After the Revolution, Americans feared strong central government from their experience with Parliament's rule through excessive taxation and military force. In response, the founders created the Articles of Confederation, placing extreme limits on Congress, such as enforcing trade among states in Article 4 and restricting the collection of taxes in Article 7, which prevented the government from functioning effectively. Thus, Congress's legislative powers and limitations were first and most explicitly stated, preventing the same failures of Parliament and the Articles of Confederation, which established a balance of serving the people's common good while preserving society.
The herein granted clause of Article 1, Section 1 lets only Congress create laws related to legislative powers, including the Senate's power to try impeachments and the House of Representatives' power to propose bills for raising revenue. Article 1, Section 8 specifically gives power to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court, while Article 1, Section 9 limits Congress to not pass any bill of attainder or ex post facto law, therefore leaving little room for interpretation, preventing an abusive legislative body.
However, Section 8, Clause 18 states that Congress has the power to create laws that are necessary and proper, which is exceedingly ambiguous, granting Congress room to expand legislation with more flexibility. Justice Felix Frankfurter still considered this the most important single sentence in American constitutional law.
In order for Congress to serve as the first and fundamental natural law, their powers are extended into Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5, so that they, being the best link to the people, can have direct influence into other branches. Article 2 states, the President can appoint Supreme Court justices with advice and consent of the Senate. Consequently, President Barack Obama has been unable to appoint a new judge to replace the late Justice Antonin Scalia because the Senate will not consent.
Article 4 enables Congress to admit new states into the Union as well as combine or split states, which is necessary so the partition of a state without consent quiets the jealousy of a larger state, as James Madison explained in Federalist 43. Additionally, Article 5 gives Congress the power to propose amendments.
In 1951, after President Roosevelt served 3 terms, Congress ratified the 22nd Amendment, limiting the presidency to 2 terms, galvanizing the unwritten rule that originated with George Washington. These provisions help create the fundamental law of all commonwealths, which is establishing legislative powers.
Congress needed to be explicitly given power over the states to preserve the public good after the Civil War because of the perpetual conflict between state and federal power. Therefore, the enforcement provisions were specifically added to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation, was later added to the 18th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments in order to further expand the powers of Congress.
In the 1965 Supreme Court case, South Carolina versus Katzenbach, South Carolina was forced to abandon its Jim Crow policies by ruling the Voting Rights Act as a necessary and proper use of the 15th Amendment's enforcement clause. However, the enforcement clauses have limits. In the 1997 Supreme Court case, City of Warren versus Flores, Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote, Congress has been given the power to enforce, not the power to determine what constitutes a constitutional violation, restricting their enforcement powers.
The framers agreed with Locke's fundamental government when he stated, "There can only be one supreme power, legislative power, to which the rest are and must be subordinate." Thank you.
All right, then we're gonna have some follow-up questions. The first being, with all these announced powers of Congress, how does the Bill of Rights limit the power of Congress?
The Bill of Rights limits the power of Congress from creating any laws that go against, for example, is in the First Amendment, free speech and the right to petition your government, the right to press. So that is one enforcement that limits Congress. Originally, it was only made to limit the national government, as we can see in the case of Barron v. Baltimore.
Additionally, Amendment 10, it ratifies all what's not in the Constitution is given to the states, which limits the national government because they cannot overstep what is the state's powers.
Okay, there's been some talk about the necessary and proper clause. Does that clause actually contradict the principle of an enumerated powers government?
Alexander Hamilton considered the necessary and proper clause just a clarification of all of the enumerated powers listed prior to it. He claimed that it was just a way for them to carry out anything necessary and proper to enforce all of the enumerated powers prior.
Also, the necessary and proper clause doesn't necessarily just mean anything that's necessary and proper. Both of, it has its roots in the rest of Article 1, Section 8. So for example, with the power to create the Air Force isn't specifically listed in the Constitution, but since with Article 1, Section Clause 12 and the necessary and proper clause, it can happen.
We've also seen with the necessary and proper clause, although Jefferson saw this as an evil, it was used to purchase the Louisiana Purchase, which was something Jefferson was very pro for.
So we've talked about enumerated powers. How would you distinguish between expressed or enumerated powers of Congress and implied powers?
We can see the implied powers of Congress are sections like the Commerce Clause. Although it says Commerce Clause, we aren't explicitly told, or they're not expressed, what exactly is commerce. And commerce was later defined in the Supreme Court case U.S. v. Lopez as either the channels, devices of commerce, and if they have a significant impact. So that would be an example of an implied power.
We also see as an expressed power, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, as a general welfare clause, as well as Congress being given the power of the purse, which is more of an expressed power, or yes, an expressed power in the Constitution.
To expand off of that, even with the Supreme Court case, McCulloch versus Maryland, it came into question whether the president had the power to create the national bank, but so it's not exactly enumerated in the Constitution, but with the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, Section 8, that they deemed it was okay that it could happen.
Okay.
You mentioned Merrick Garland in your opening testimony. I'm wondering if you believe that the power to advise and consent to appointments implies a duty to do so.
In Federalist 67, Alexander Hamilton explicitly states that the senatorial power to give advice and consent is joint with the president, so it is necessary for the Senate to provide that advice.
What is the remedy if they don't? As in the current situation where the nominee was submitted and nothing is happened. Does the Senate have a duty to vote one way or the other? Or is it all right for them just to abstain and not vote at all?
Congress is seen as the people's branch, being that both the House of Representatives and the Senate are directly elected by the people. So I would consider that they have the responsibility to listen to the people, while they can still act as trustees and follow what their opinion feels is best for this country. They still should have a duty to listen to public opinion.
The concern right now is that if court cases were to be brought to
Well, the Senate could pass that through, Merrick Garland, they could pass him through, but they do know that that could swing the Supreme Court conservative or liberal in this case. So while it is important that they pass a judge through, they don't want to hastily make that decision that would influence the entire country.
Another large reason why you could argue that the Supreme Court or the Senate has waited is because we did just elect a new president, and in that case, the remedy for this issue is going to be that
I think we're done. Time to keep this thing stopped, that's all right. I thought all five of you handled these questions very well. It was an evenly balanced presentation among all of you. You all maintained excellent eye contact, and your answers were responsive.
Likewise, extremely impressed. You answered the questions, your citations to the political philosophers, the historical events, the laws, you drew, and it showed that you know what you're talking about, you know the subject. When we were asking questions, you didn't blink. You looked at us and, man, it came out of your head. I mean, that was impressive. Your voices were well modulated. You had the confidence to say, yeah, here's my answer. So, very, very good.
Yeah, I'll just add, some of the questions we asked were ones that we dreamed up. They were not all the ones that were given to us at the time. They were not intended to be easy.
They were perfect questions.
Great job. Wow. I'm very impressed. Geez, hard to know where to start. We've asked some of